We have just heard this reading about the tombs. The Lord discreetly is pointing out the reality of tombs, although the point made is about hypocrisy. But nevertheless, a tomb, about which one cannot but think on an anniversary day like this, is always in its silence a powerful sermon. Just on Sunday, coming back from the parish where every Sunday morning I go to confession at the same time and see the parish priest, I passed through the cemetery which is between the parish church and my little hermitage, and my attention was caught by this, so much so that I clipped it on this. Now, by dint of modern science, I'll try and behave intelligently. Are you sitting comfortably? And I shall try to begin. Guess who said this? It's written on the tomb, the last tomb to be put there just recently in this graveyard. Try and magnify this. To live, or rather to lie in the soft brown earth with the grasses waving above one's head, and listen to silence, to have no yesterday and no tomorrow, to forget time, to forgive life, to lie at peace. Any idea who wrote it?
Who am I here? Shemasini,
Actually, it's earlier. It's Oscar Wilde,
Oh, yeah.
who had an interesting death, as you know. But he left, whatever you say about him, having left a bit of his soul forever, chiselled not so much in the stone, but on the pages that will be turned until the end of time. A genius. In fact, he said one time at the harbour, when the question was asked, anything to declare? Nothing except my genius. Modesty. But he was somebody who in his life, and therefore forevermore, has given joy, precisely by the power that was in his head. He used it well. He used the talents that were given him. Without realizing it, we're always quoting him. No, I can resist anything but temptation, and so on. Now, let's get this straight. We only have a certain amount of time between the morning and the evening of our life. Today I had a little tiny newborn child in my arms, and it makes one think time, we don't know, is going to come to an end also for that newborn child. And when a child is born, it's written over its head, question mark. Will it make it or not? That's the fundamental question. Will it be this way or that way? And in the meantime, it's got to use what it's got. Now, a child born into a nest where there is warmth, prayer, grace, and safety is really blessed. But even there, the risk is the same, because old Nick doesn't want that soul lost to him. He wants his bit of flesh, and as soon as he can, he'll try to get that soul. And the age of innocence all the time is coming down. Just look carefully at what children are watching. It's not just innocent stuff sometimes, the programs and DVDs that they are exposed to, because now if you look carefully, even at Walt Disney, you've got vampires and whatnot, amongst what used to be quite innocent before. Where's that coming from? And even the difference between what a child would have been exposed to when we were children and what they are now, at the safe moments of what used to be children's hour is not the same. One big difference is that adverts come in and the adverts aren't pure. Therefore they see it all. In some countries more than others. But there is also the question of how present God is to the equation. Now, I've mentioned the question of the television because it's a huge victory for the enemy of the soul, that the child now, massively in this Holy Emerald Isle, will not have access to what the child would have had automatically at the end of every day before. Now, I want to drop a gentle, very discreet hint, because Our Lady knows about it. And you know that the one constant in each of the 6 apparitions at Fatima was a big, big hint, quite explicit. Here we are, just about visible, just in case you forget. The hint is there, because she was actually wearing it. She was also wearing the brown scapular, I think, in the 6th apparition. But this, she insisted every time, thank you, from Fatima itself, she wanted it said every day. Old Nick knows it, and he won't have it. So what does he do? Even in good families, bit by bit, he makes this moment a source of discord, grunting noises, and eventually open rebellion. So Mammy eventually will back down for the sake of peace. And of course, Old Nick will enthrone himself in the image of the beast, the new tabernacle, which takes up whole evenings and excludes conversation. If you dare to talk when a program is on, you're hushed. The virtual is more important than the real. Politeness is shown to an absent being, and impoliteness to Daddy and Mammy, or even brother and sister. So that, my friends, is the average situation now in an Irish evening. It was not the case 50 years ago, and it was not the case either when they only had this. In the penal times, only this was allowed discreetly because they couldn't stop it. Anything else, as you know, they tried hard and actually quite successfully to stop, at least in public, the Holy Sacrifice. Now, and that step further, on the Sunday itself, we've got something very insidious coming through. You know that one of the great bastions of Irish culture was the combination of recreation with faith. These great Catholic societies which based good sportsmanship with Catholic culture, the GAA in particular, promoting the Irish language and all that goes with it. Now, have you noticed that not overtly, but bit by bit, there's been a creeping into the most sacred part of the week in the way that games are being organised, now increasingly closely in juxtaposition to what was sacrosanct when we had Sunday morning together, and I mean together as a family. All around the same word, and therefore the same challenge, and the same grace of the sacraments. Now, Mammy and Daddy have to bend over backwards to satisfy the needs of, I suppose, the age group of yourself down there, who would want other important centres of the universe as round as a ball at that time on a Sunday morning. And so they'll disperse and go to different celebrations, Saturday evening notably, which means that we end up with a situation which was described by Benedict XVI as a Sunday without God. It's all been got over and done with on Saturday evening. Now that is Christian nonsense. We're celebrating the victory of the resurrection, and we're Christianizing the Jewish Shabbat, which means rest, which was, and still is if you go to Israel, very different from any other day. And now, what have we got? Hardly a time for a Hail Mary on a Sunday in Christian Ireland. Old Nick is very clever, isn't he? Now, all this in the context of the feast that we have today, St. Monica, patron saint of mothers. St. Ambrose, who baptized St. Augustine, is known to have said that the son of so many tears could not be lost. And then, when in 387 she was dying at Ostia, the port of Rome, Ostia, the root means doors of Rome, the port. She was supposed to be going back to Africa where she wanted to die. But she there was petering out, and she said to her son, Augustine, there were two brothers there, now I can die in peace because I have nothing more to live for. I have had the joy of seeing you in the Catholic faith, because he was involved with Manichaeism and all the rest of it. And of course his friend, his mistress, which he had for years. So, eventually, having already converted her husband, Patricius, who was a good man but not a Christian, she was able to go and leave to Augustine, would you believe it, the forming of the Western Church to a large extent in the early centuries. He gave us a vocabulary in Latin, and his brain is something else. Volumes upon volumes upon volumes upon volumes. And also the rule which more than half the religions of the world follow, at least in the West, including what we were following in Kilnacrot nearby here. Now, all that to say that again, a brain which when it petered out was going to leave what? Energy which would flow through the ink until the end of time. We can leave a trace. Or we can leave the opposite, a bad memory. Now, you who are still in school, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you already have had experience of somebody close to you who have decided to end it all. It's pretty frequent, isn't it? And they're given a good send-off. And it becomes a heroic act, when it's actually not. It's a cowardly act. Rather than face life, and one causes pain to everyone around one. Now that, when a person wakes up on the other side and really sees things as they are, is a terrible, terrible loss of a chance which never again will come back. So we don't know which way it's going to go. And with regard to that, the mothers suffer terribly. And if one has to go to a funeral of a person who's done that, one has but to see the tears of these monikers of our day to see how much pain this causes, and how it's not at all a gentle act to the parents. It all is shown to the soul on the other side, what has been left behind in the way of pain and tears. But there's no coming back. And when one thinks about it, the throwing back of that gift, as I was thinking of this child in my arms this morning, the very thought of throwing back the gift of life in the face of the Creator is the worst insult possible, and one of the greatest victories of the enemy of the soul. Satan is involved in these acts, and we know it now from some survivors of suicide. If you listen to them, they will sometimes come out with things which are actually quite spooky. I've had one or two direct references, contacts with people who've been involved with this, and apparently it's not unknown for a genuine presence and even a voice to be making itself known and enticing towards this act, which is presented to them in a strange way as the most blissful thing possible. It's very, very dangerous if that thought ever comes to a young person's mind, and it's hugely, hugely fashionable. On internet now, the means of do-it-yourself kind of thing, how to do it painlessly. And if one notices the effect, one has a role model effect for the others. It's epidemic in proportions. So all this to say, my friends, that before we lie in the tomb, as we're thinking about now, Mary, how many years is it now, Charlie, since she died?
4.
4 years on this day. How we think about just seeing actually pictures around different stages of her life. It all ends up there, no matter how young we are, the full stop is there. Because if we look at the map of eternity in time, time, where we are now, is a tiny speck. Because infinity goes on and on and on. We can't actually comprehend what it is, the universe without a lid, as it were. Time will not stop. So once we're beyond that point of cross-section, intersection between time and eternity, which is our last breath, which we can actually accelerate by these acts, then the horizon opens as in a play, the stage is revealed, the lights come on, the lights of the audience go off, they're dimmed, and the stage opens on the bright lights of the reality of the horizon, which at that point is the only reality forevermore. And apparently, and we know this from people who have had NDE, near-death experience in operations and so on, at the moment of departure of the soul at that point, because there's no more distraction and is not functioning through the senses anymore for its perception, perceives everything and more with a huge clarity. Therefore, it sees exactly its state and what it's done to itself and anyone else. So there's already at that point what we call the particular judgment. It sees itself and sees also the consequences of its state. So we can't, if we're in a bad state at that point, go to God. We have to go somewhere else. It's automatic, because we can't just go like that and crash into the Divine Majesty. And even for those who are trying to pray, it's very, very few indeed who don't have to have some unfinished business to sort out, because God is God, thrice holy, and we're pretty awful in His sight. So in that sense, let's this night try to collocate our existence somehow in our infinitesimal speck regarding what we're doing now at the altar as the reality, veiled, but that to which we're going, homeward bound. In that sense, we now pray for Mary and ask the Lord to apply this, even by anticipation, for the rest of her soul. And we ask also that she'll be able to help us from beyond and be a good mother to us all, as she was in her innings on earth. August and glorious, wonder unseen, yet heard through Christendom from age to age. Could ere thy quill have known what shapes would mean, what strength of voice it left upon the page. O hidden face untraced by any man, we gaze upon thee through the memory of characters that hold what thinking can pass through the veins of copied history. O wielder of the pen that moved the world, O little hand that thought the thoughts of all, teach us to feel the moving of a word, to hear the echo of a sound so small. For thou didst write, and in the height of thought didst pause to cause a tremor that would stir the heart of oft a traveller here caught, where waves of a moving meaning yet occur. And from the grave of long antiquity, thy silent hand yet steers our wayward limbs, and there is in a sound eternity. For thou hast traced a glory no age dims.